We now have scores across every level. We have report scores, external data scores, scores relations to averages, digital analysis, number ranking, rules engine scores. And what we're trying to do is get back to this master transactional score. So for each transaction, each payables invoice, each journal entry transaction, we're trying to say, is that particular transaction odd or weird? And mathematically, we can start to do that. And just moving to the next slide, the result, instead of sampling just based on haphazard sampling or maybe even monetary unit sampling, which is a little better, we're now going to be sampling on risk as you define it mathematically based on all of these factors that we've identified. So it's kind of the combined weirdness is now what we're going to be using as part of our analysis. So we need to summarize them together. In ACL, I started out doing this, and here are just some example ACL code, and I'll show you the ACL project in a second. But in essence, all we're doing is we're opening up each of the reports that we have, like lot of round or blank supplier information or high dollars with low transactions for a particular vendor. And in this case, we were joining everything by supplier. So this was more of that supplier vendor score that we talked about. So let's just quickly look in ACL here on how I did that. So in ACL, in the particular scripts that I had in the scoring, I basically ran each one of the reports and then I combined them all together using the scoring script. So this isn't an ACL lesson today, but I did want to show you how simple that could be, where you can run each report, get a key field, which in this case the key field would be the field of supplier number, and then we would join everything together based on that supplier number field. So that's one approach, and again, that was the approach that I originally used when I was working with ACL on this particular type of function. Now, you can move that over to Excel quite easily. So taking that Excel example into Excel with this picture, you can see how using Vlookup, we could actually have a sheet in Excel for each one of the scores. So report 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And that relates back on supplier number back to this original spreadsheet so that we can calculate a final score. And again, just kind of counting across the scores, you can get to that ultimate final score at the end there. So, and that would be in column B. So we're using Vlookup, and we're just going to create multiple sheets for each report and then combine them all together. Now in Excel, this will be one of the sample files you'll get. You notice that we have a sheet for the 7 reports, and as I go across, we have a report 1 score, 2 score, 3 score, etc. And that goes right across. And all I did was I created a report summarized by supplier number and just said, does that supplier show up on that report? Okay, so let's now go to this final spreadsheet that's going to have all this information. I have my supplier number column on the left. You could have other information over here, like a total amount to that supplier, a total count to that supplier as an example. And then what I'm going to do is use a Vlookup. Vlookup is going to let's just look at the function here. So Vlookup is going to look at cell A2 in this case, and it's going to the report 1 score, which is sheet 1, and that's sheet 1 down here, and it's going to go from A2 to B100 because that's the data that we had in there. And it's going to pick up the second column, and a very good thing to do here is to put false because we want an exact match to that supplier number, not a fuzzy match now, but more of an exact match, and that's what this Vlookup will do. So let's take a look at the data. So again, we have A2, that's going there, sheet 1, A2 to B100. So A2 to B100, perfect. Now I've used F4 on this data, so in here what I did was I just selected the A part, and then I hit my F4 key, I hit the B part, hit my F4 key, and that locks that in so that I can then copy this formula down this entire column, which we did, and by copying it down it will then place that calculation, now it's A6, So here it's A6 looking at A2 to B100, nothing changes there. Again, we're selecting column 2. Column 2 in this case is the report score based on the supplier number. You wouldn't want to bring over column 1 in the Vlookup. And false because, again, we want a perfect match. I've now done this for each one of these sheets. So I had to make a separate VLOOKUP. This is a VLOOKUP to sheet 2, A2, etc. This is a VLOOKUP to sheet 3, which is report 3, as we said, and continue on. You could keep going here. You could have 20 of them. It doesn't really matter. You then want to total that, summarize that into this final score on the left by just doing an equal sum of these, in this case, 7 report scores. And that gets you to that final score for analysis. So even in Excel, by running each one of these reports, and you can use whatever tool you want, Excel, Active Data, Topcats, to get to that answer, you would then be able to use Excel to bring that together into a final analysis. While we've been talking about how to do this vendor scoring, because that was the original thing that I did. I did more of a vendor score summarized up. Does that vendor show up on that particular report? Then I would say, okay, put an X next to them and give them whatever score you want to give them. Normally scores would be, let's say 100% would be a top score, and therefore if you had 7 reports, you may want to weight it where certain reports have a higher scoring, and you'll notice that the reports that we had in Excel did follow that methodology. But what I've even moved more towards is having a transactional score. So it's not a supplier score, but more of at each transaction level. So if, let's say you had 40 reports, a single score is given to each transaction based on its severity. So the transaction may show up on 20 reports, therefore, it gets that scoring. And each report, as I said, you might want to score some of them. Let's say we had, in this case, 25 reports, and in that case, 100%, everybody would get 4 points. If you showed up on report 1, that transaction would get 4 points, and getting up to a score of 100 at the end of the day if you showed up on all 25 reports. You might want to weight it differently, where report 1 might be a way more important and unusual report than report 20. And therefore, you might want to give that a score of 15. And the report 20, you might want to give a score of 1 out of 100. Because it's just not that, so it's up to you how you want to score it and how you want to mathematically define your risk. However you do it, I would work more at the transaction level and then summarize. So you can then take that transactional score and summarize it now by enterer, by partner, by department, by time, and we'll talk about that. What's interesting there is in the summary, you can get back to that supplier summary anyway. So what we talked about just a second ago, you can very, very quickly get back to a transactional score that's then summarized by supplier, and I think that that has much more relevance than just saying whether or not a supplier showed up on a particular report. We can then also graph that, because graphing definitely helps out, and that will be something that we will talk about now. And the goal of all of this is looking more at the severity and volume of that in these particular graphs and summaries.